Flight staff's blunder, with black surgeon's bag ends in 520 Meadows insurance nightmare. The white envelope lay on Charles Meadows' desk like a landmine. The Delta Airlines logo glared back at him, taunting. As chief risk officer for Meridian Insurance, he'd seen countless incident reports cross his desk over 27 years, but this one, this damned letter, had kept him awake for 3 straight nights. His secretary had placed it there Monday morning with the rest of his correspondence, not knowing it contained the power to upend a $500 million relationship that had stood for over 3 decades. Charles ran his weathered hand across his silver-flecked temples, the throbbing behind his eyes intensifying as he reached for the phone. Some decisions in business were complicated. This one, despite the astronomical figures involved, was becoming increasingly, devastatingly simple. "Get me Aaron Walsh at Delta," he said, voice steady despite the churning in his stomach, "and clear my afternoon." 3 months earlier, Dr. Elaine Beckett had been rushing through Terminal B at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, her carry-on roller bag in one hand, her medical equipment case clutched in the other. At 57, the renowned cardiologist still moved with the sprightly energy of someone decades younger, navigating the crowded terminal with practiced efficiency. 28 years of emergency calls had trained her body to respond to the word urgent like a well-conditioned athlete. Final boarding call for Delta Flight 1387 to Boston, departing from Gate B22, the announcement blared. Elaine quickened her pace. The text from Boston General had been brief but clear. Her colleague, Dr. Marshall, was unexpectedly unavailable for tomorrow morning's procedure, and they needed her expertise. A 16-year-old boy named Darius Williams was scheduled for a rare and complex cardiac procedure that couldn't be delayed. The hospital administrator had pulled strings to get her on this last evening flight, promising a car would be waiting when she landed in Boston. There would be just enough time to review the case files tonight and perform the surgery in the morning. "Ma'am, you'll need to check that second bag," said the gate agent, a young man with a name tag reading Tyler, who barely looked up from his computer. "We're on final boarding, and overhead space is limited." "This contains critical medical equipment," Elaine explained, slightly breathless from her dash through the terminal. "I'm a cardiologist heading to Boston General for an emergency procedure tomorrow morning. These are specialized instruments that can't be checked." Tyler finally looked up, his eyes briefly scanning Elaine's face, then dropping to her medical bag, sleek, black, with a discreet caduceus symbol embossed on the side. His expression remained impassive. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but policy is policy. The flight is full, and we need to depart. You'll need to check the bag or take a later flight." Elaine felt a familiar tightening in her chest, not anxiety, about missing the flight, but the slow burn of recognition. Over 3 decades in medicine, she'd grown accustomed to the subtle shifts in expression, the momentary hesitations, the inexplicable roadblocks that seemed to materialize only for her. As one of the few black female cardiologists of her generation, she'd learned to navigate these moments with a practiced grace that belied her inner frustration. "This bag contains delicate instruments calibrated specifically for tomorrow's procedure," she explained, keeping her voice measured and professional. "Perhaps I could speak with your supervisor." Tyler's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, we're on final boarding. There's no time for that. You need to make a decision." Behind her, Elaine heard an impatient sigh from another passenger waiting to board. The pressure of the moment, the surgery tomorrow, the waiting passengers, the unyielding expression on Tyler's face converged like a vice. "I'll take it up with the flight attendants," she decided, moving past Tyler toward the jet bridge. Sometimes she had learned it was better to seek forgiveness than permission. The life of a teenage boy might depend on her making this flight. As she stepped onto the plane, Elaine was greeted by a flight attendant with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard. Let me help you find space for those bags." Elaine followed, her down the aisle, relief washing over her. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Rebecca, seemed more understanding than the gate agent. I have medical equipment in this bag, Elaine explained quietly. I'm heading to Boston for an emergency procedure tomorrow. Rebecca's smile remained fixed, but her eyes darted to the already crowded overhead bins. I understand, but we're completely full today. Let me see what we can do. She led Elaine toward the back of the plane, where a small space remained in an overhead compartment. Your roller bag can fit here, Rebecca said, effortlessly lifting it into place. For your medical bag, I'm afraid we'll need to gate check it. I promise we'll handle it with care. I can't check this bag, Elaine insisted, feeling the first flutter of real panic. These are specialized instruments I need for a cardiac procedure tomorrow morning. A 16-year-old boy is counting on me. Rebecca's smile tightened. I understand, but there's simply no room left. FAA regulations prohibit storing items under the seat in front of you in the exit row. I'm not seated in an exit row, Elaine pointed out. Even so, that bag looks too large to fit comfortably under the seat, and we can't block the pathway in case of an emergency evacuation, Rebecca countered. I'm sorry, but I'll need to take that bag now. We're delaying departure. From the front of the plane, another flight attendant, an older man with silver hair and the authoritative bearing of a lead cabin member, approached. Is there a problem here? No problem, Michael, Rebecca responded. Just explaining. To this passenger that we need to gate check her second bag. Michael assessed the situation with a quick glance. Ma'am, I need you to surrender the bag for gate checking or you'll need to deplane. We're already behind schedule. Elaine felt the eyes of nearby passengers on her, the weight of their collective impatience pressing against her resolve. She thought of Darius Williams, the 16-year-old waiting for her in Boston, and of the countless times she'd stood her ground in operating rooms and hospital boardrooms. This bag contains medical equipment that cannot be checked, she said firmly. I'm Dr. Elaine Beckett, Chief of Cardiology at Emory University Hospital. I'm traveling to perform emergency surgery tomorrow morning. These instruments are calibrated specifically for this procedure. Michael's expression didn't change. Doctor or not, the same rules apply to everyone. We need that bag now, or you'll need to take another flight. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Elaine calculated quickly. The next flight wouldn't get her to Boston until morning, too late for adequate preparation. Missing this flight wasn't an option. Fine, she conceded reluctantly, handing over the medical bag. But please handle it with extreme care. Lives literally depend on these instruments. Michael took the bag with a curt nod. We'll take good care of it, ma'am. Please take your seat so we can prepare for departure. As Elaine settled into her seat, a heaviness settled over her that had nothing to do with pre-flight anxiety. She'd spent decades building her reputation, earning respect in a field that had initially been reluctant to accept her. Yet, in moments like these, she still found herself forced to surrender, not just her medical bag, but a small piece of her dignity. Little did she know that this seemingly routine conflict would set in motion a chain of events that would send shockwaves through one of America's largest airlines, affect thousands of employees, and ultimately lead to boardroom decisions involving hundreds of millions of dollars. For now, though, Elaine Beckett simply fastened her seatbelt, closed her eyes, and tried to focus on the surgery that awaited her in Boston. In the belly of the aircraft, however, her medical bag was already beginning its own journey, one that would prove far more consequential than anyone could have imagined. Marcus Jenkins had been handling baggage at Hartsfield-Jackson for nearly 15 years. At 48, his body carried the wear of countless shifts spent lifting, hauling, and maneuvering luggage through the labyrinthine system beneath Atlanta's Mammoth Airport. The constant strain had left its mark, a persistent ache in his lower back, shoulders that crackled like bubble wrap when he rolled them, and hands permanently calloused from repetitive friction. Tonight's shift had already stretched 2 hours beyond schedule, thanks to weather delays that had compressed the evening flight schedule into a chaotic crush. As gate-checked bags from Delta Flight 1387 came down the jet bridge chute, Marcus sighed at the additional work. Late gate checks always threw off their carefully orchestrated loading process. Last-minute princess bags, grumbled his co-worker. Darnell, using their nickname for items passengers had tried to carry on despite size restrictions. Why can't people just follow the damn rules? Marcus nodded absently as he reached for a sleek black bag that had just slid down the chute. Unlike the typical roller suitcase or duffel, this one had a distinctive design, more structured, with what appeared to be a medical symbol embossed on the side. Something about it suggested importance beyond the usual vacation clothes or business documents. This one looks different, Marcus observed, turning the bag in his weathered hands. Some kind of medical kit, maybe. Darnell barely glanced up. Tag says Boston, same as the others. Just toss it on the cart. Marcus hesitated. Years of experience had taught him that not all bags were created equal. Some contained items of genuine importance, medications, medical equipment, irreplaceable keepsakes. The conscientiousness that had earned him Employee of the Month 3 times during his tenure made him pause. Hold up, he said, examining a handwritten note hastily attached to the handle. In neat, precise handwriting, someone had written, "Critical medical equipment. Handle with extreme care. Dr. EBT. Hey, this is doctor's equipment. Says, it's critical," Marcus called to Darnell. Darnell looked up from the manifest he was checking, irritation flashing across his face. "And we got 8 more flights to load in the next hour, man. Just put it with the others. It'll get special treatment when I get special pay." Marcus frowned. "Come on, man. This could be important, like life-saving important." If it was that important. They wouldn't have checked it, Darnell countered, with the weary logic of someone who'd seen too many urgent items come through the system. Rich folks always think their stuff is more important than everyone else's. Marcus started to respond, but was interrupted by the crackling of their supervisor's voice over the radio, demanding an update on the Boston flight's loading. Progress. The pressure of the schedule, always the schedule, pushed against Marcus's instinct to give the medical bag special attention. With a resigned sigh, he placed the bag atop the pile on the cart, positioning it so it wouldn't fall. It was the small rebellion he could manage, not the separate handling the bag's owner had clearly wanted, but better than the careless toss Darnell seemed to favor. As they finished loading the cart and began the drive across the tarmac toward the waiting aircraft, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the black bag was somehow watching him, judging his compromise. What Marcus Jenkins couldn't know, what no one involved in the handling of Flight 1387 could know, was that his small decision, made under pressure amid the controlled chaos of America's busiest airport, would eventually reach the desk of Meridian Insurance's chief risk officer. His choice, like Dr. Beckett's before him, was one unremarkable link in a chain that would ultimately threaten a $500 million relationship between 2 corporate giants. For now, though, the medical bag simply bounced along on top of the luggage cart, jostling with each bump on the tarmac as it made its way toward the plane's cargo hold and toward a destiny none of its handlers could possibly foresee. While Marcus and Darnell loaded baggage onto Flight 1387, Cameron Wilson was reviewing quarterly risk assessment reports in his glass-walled office on the 23rd floor of Delta's corporate headquarters. At 39, Cameron had rapidly ascended through the company's ranks, his keen analytical mind and unwavering confidence making him a rising star in the airline's executive team. As Delta's vice president of operations safety, he prided himself on his ability to identify potential problems before they materialized. The incident reports from the past month lay scattered across his desk. A minor hydraulic fluid leak in Cincinnati, a baggage handler injury in Salt Lake City, a passenger altercation on a Dallas flight, all routine, all meticulously documented, all well within the parameters of the airline's insurance coverage with Meridian. Nothing that would disturb the careful equilibrium Cameron had helped maintain throughout his 7-year tenure. His phone buzzed, displaying his assistant's name. "Your 4O is here, Mr. Wilson. It's Diana from Customer Experience." Cameron glanced at his watch, surprised the afternoon had passed so quickly. "Send her in." Diana Chen entered with the brisk efficiency that had made her both respected and feared throughout the organization. At 47, she had spent 2 decades in customer service across 3 major airlines, giving her an unparalleled understanding of passenger psychology and complaint patterns. "I've got something you should see," she said without preamble, placing a folder on his desk. "Complaint came in this morning from a passenger on yesterday's Atlanta to Boston flight. Doctor says her medical equipment was damaged during handling. She's claiming it compromised a surgical procedure." Cameron raised an eyebrow, reaching for the folder. "Compromised how?" "Patient survived, thankfully, but apparently the procedure was complicated by equipment issues. The doctor had to improvise, which extended operating time significantly. She's attributing it directly to mishandling of her medical bag." As Cameron scanned the complaint form, several phrases jumped out at him. Repeated attempts to keep bag in cabin denied, explicitly warned about calibration sensitivity, visible signs of rough handling, instruments requiring recalibration. A cold knot formed in his stomach. "The passenger, Dr. Beckett. She's the chief of cardiology at Emory," Diana continued. "This isn't some casual complaint from an occasional traveler. She's a Diamond Medallion member who flies with us weekly for medical conferences and consultations." Cameron closed the folder, his mind already racing through protocols and potential responses. "Has legal seen this yet?" "Not yet. I came to you first because—" Diana hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Because there's a complexity here that goes beyond standard complaint procedure. Dr. Beckett is alleging that the gate agent and flight attendants dismissed her concerns specifically because of her race. She's African American. The knot in Cameron's stomach tightened. In his years overseeing safety operations, he had developed an almost preternatural sense for distinguishing between routine complaints and potential crises. This situation was rapidly revealing itself as the latter. "What exactly is she claiming happened?" he asked, pulling a legal pad toward him. Diana consulted her tablet. "She says she identified herself as a physician traveling for emergency surgery, explained the critical nature of her medical equipment, and was dismissed by both the gate agent and cabin crew. She specifically notes that a white male passenger with camera equipment was allowed to store his bag in the first-class closet on the same flight, despite not being seated in first class." Cameron began making notes, his handwriting becoming progressively tighter as he processed the implications. "And the equipment damage? When she retrieved her bag in Boston, the calibrated instruments showed signs of impact. According to her statement, she tried to recalibrate on site, but couldn't restore them to surgical precision. She performed the procedure using backup techniques, which extended operating time and increased risk to the patient." "Is she threatening legal action?" Diana met his gaze directly. "Not explicitly, but she's requesting a formal investigation, documentation of our baggage handling protocols, compensation for the equipment, and, this is key, she wants to meet with airline representatives to discuss what she describes as the pattern of dismissive treatment experienced by minority professionals when their credentials are questioned." Cameron set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware of tension building between his shoulder blades. What had begun as a standard end-of-day meeting was rapidly evolving into something far more complex. Who handled the initial response? Customer Relations sent the standard apology email with an offer of bonus miles and a travel voucher. Diana's expression made clear her opinion of this approach. Cameron winced. "So, we've essentially confirmed receipt without addressing the substance of her complaint." "Correct. And given Dr. Beckett's status and the nature of her allegations, I don't think our standard response protocol is adequate here." Cameron stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline as he considered their options. Behind every customer complaint lay potential risks, to reputation, to regulatory standing, to insurance status. His job was to assess those risks dispassionately and chart the safest course for the airline. "We need to get ahead of this," he said finally. "I want a full investigation, baggage handling records, CCTV from the gate area, statements from the crew members involved, and I want it all yesterday. Diana nodded, already making notes on her tablet. What about Dr. Beckett? She's requested a response within the week. Cameron turned back from the window. Decision made. Set up a meeting. I'll handle this one personally. As Diana left his office, Cameron returned to the complaint file, reading it more carefully now. Something about the doctor's methodical documentation of events, her precise language, her clear escalation path. It all suggested a woman who was not seeking drama, but accountability. In his experience, these were often the most challenging complaints to address, because they couldn't be dismissed with platitudes or token compensation. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Jack, it's Cameron Wilson. I need you to pull the personnel files for the crew on yesterday's Atlanta to Boston flight 11387. Yes, including training records and any previous incidents. He paused, listening. No public situation yet, but we have a complaint with potential. I'm just being thorough. After ending the call, Cameron added another note to his legal pad. Insurance notification. He circled it twice, then drew a question mark beside it. Meridian Insurance had been Delta's primary liability carrier for over 3 decades, covering everything from minor baggage claims to major incidents. Their contract included notification requirements for any incident that might result in significant liability or reputational risk. Was this such an incident? Cameron wasn't sure. On the surface, it was a straightforward case of baggage mishandling, with unfortunate consequences, the kind of thing that happened daily across the airline industry. But the racial component, combined with the medical implications and the complainant's professional status, suggested potential complications that might warrant early disclosure to their insurers. He circled the note a third time, deciding to revisit the question after the initial investigation. For now, there were more immediate concerns, like understanding exactly what had happened on Flight 1387 and why a distinguished physician's critical warnings about her medical equipment had gone unheeded. What Cameron couldn't know, as he methodically began constructing his investigation plan, was that Meridian Insurance was already watching this situation unfold with growing concern. Concern that would soon transform into alarm as the full implications of Dr. Beckett's experience became clear. The Boston General Hospital Surgical Wing maintained a particular quality of silence in the early morning hours, not the absence of sound, but rather a purposeful quietness, a collective focusing of energy before the day's work began. At 5:30 a.m., Dr. Elaine Beckett stood alone in Prep Room 3, meticulously inspecting each instrument she had brought from Atlanta. Sleep had been elusive the night before. After retrieving her medical bag at baggage claim, she had immediately noticed the difference, a subtle wrongness in the weight distribution, a faint rattling where there should have been none. Opening it in the back of the airport taxi confirmed her fears. Despite the carefully attached warning note, the bag had been handled roughly enough to disrupt the precisely calibrated instruments inside. She had spent hours in her hotel room, attempting to recalibrate, employing all the techniques developed over decades of cardiac surgery. But some calibrations required specialized equipment not available outside a proper medical facility. She had finally fallen into restless sleep around 3 a.m., setting her alarm for 4:30 to arrive early at the hospital for final preparations. Now, as she adjusted the final instrument, the door opened behind her. Dr. Patricia Winters, Boston, General's Chief of Pediatric Surgery, entered with 2 coffee cups in hand. "Thought you might need this," Patricia said, offering one to Elaine. At 62, Patricia had been a pioneering figure in pediatric surgery when female surgeons were still a rarity. The silver streaks in her auburn hair and the fine lines around her eyes spoke to decades of high-pressure surgeries and middle-of-the-night emergency calls. "You're a lifesaver," Elaine said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Quite literally, in about 2 hours." Patricia glanced at the array of instruments laid out on the prep table, her experienced eye immediately noticing the alternative: arrangement. Equipment issues? Elaine took a sip of coffee before responding. Airline checked my bag despite my protests. When I got it back, the calibrations were off. She gestured to the instruments. I've compensated as best I can, but I'll need to use alternative techniques for the valve repair. Patricia frowned. Do we need to postpone? I can call Richards at Children's Hospital, see if they have the specific equipment you need. No, Elaine said firmly. Darius has already been prepped mentally and physically. His parents have been waiting months for this procedure. I've performed this operation with traditional methods before. It will take longer, require more concentration, but the outcome should be the same. Patricia studied her colleague's face, noting the determination in her eyes alongside the fatigue. I've added Dr. Chen to assist. He's young but exceptionally steady. If you're sure about proceeding, I'll support your decision. Elaine nodded, grateful for Patricia's understanding. They had first met 20 years earlier at a conference in Chicago, two women navigating the predominantly male world of specialized surgery. Over the years, they had developed a professional shorthand, a mutual respect that allowed for brutal honesty when necessary and unwavering support when needed. Tell me what happened with the airline, Patricia said, leaning against the counter. You mentioned protests. Elaine recounted the previous day's events as she continued her methodical preparations. The rush to make the flight, the resistance from the gate agent, the ultimatum from the flight attendant, the damaged equipment discovered in Boston. Did you tell them you were traveling for emergency surgery? Patricia asked, her expression darkening. Multiple times to multiple people, Elaine confirmed. I identified myself as a physician, explained the purpose of my travel, described the sensitive nature of the equipment. It made no difference. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you think was the issue? Elaine's hands paused over the instruments, the question hanging between them. Both women, successful in their fields despite decades of barriers, understood the unspoken subtext. I think, Elaine said carefully, that a certain kind of middle-aged black woman becomes invisible in certain contexts, or worse, becomes visible only as a problem to be managed rather than a professional to be respected. Patricia nodded slowly. As a white woman who had faced her own battles in medicine, she had observed the additional layers of dismissal her colleagues of color often encountered. What will you do about it? She asked simply. After the surgery, I'll file a formal complaint, Elaine replied, returning to her preparations. Not just about the equipment, though that's serious enough, but about the pattern it represents. Maybe nothing comes of it, but silence guarantees nothing changes. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. James Chen, the promising young surgeon Patricia had mentioned, entered with a deferential nod. Dr. Beckett, it's an honor to assist you today, he said, his manner both respectful and eager. I've studied your paper on minimally invasive valve repair techniques in adolescent patients. Elaine smiled warmly at the young surgeon. In him, she saw echoes of her younger self, the hunger to learn, the desire to make a difference, the underlying anxiety of wanting to prove oneself worthy of the profession. We'll be using more traditional techniques today, she explained, gesturing to the instruments. Some equipment issues have necessitated adjustments to our approach. Are you comfortable with conventional valve repair methods? Absolutely, Chen responded, though Elaine noticed the flicker of disappointment in his eyes at missing the opportunity to observe her signature techniques. I completed my residency under Dr. Gonzalez at Mayo, who still prefers traditional approaches. Excellent, Elaine said, handing him a surgical plan she had modified overnight. Review this while I speak with the family. We'll commence in 30 minutes. As Chen accepted the document and moved to the sink to begin scrubbing, Patricia touched Elaine's arm lightly. I'll check in during the procedure. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything. Elaine nodded, gathering herself for the conversation with Darius's parents. Despite the equipment complications, despite her fatigue, despite the lingering frustration from her travel experience, her focus was narrowing to the singular purpose that had driven her into medicine 3 decades earlier. A child needed her skills, and nothing else mattered right now. As she walked toward the consultation room where the Williams family waited, Elaine pushed aside all thoughts of Delta Airlines, damaged equipment, and institutional biases. For the next several hours, her world would shrink to the size of a 16-year-old's heart, a heart that, with skill and concentration, she would help continue beating for decades to come. Yet, even as she compartmentalized her personal frustrations, the ripples from Flight 1387 were spreading outward, reaching offices and boardrooms where decisions affecting thousands of employees and billions of dollars would soon be made. Across town, in Boston's financial district, Thomas Reynolds arrived at his corner office on the 32nd floor of Meridian Insurance's Northeast Regional Headquarters. At 61, Thomas had spent his entire 40-year career with the company, rising from claims adjuster to senior vice president of major accounts. His silver hair, impeccable suits, and deliberate manner gave him the appearance of a statesman rather than a corporate executive. His assistant, Margaret, intercepted him before he reached his office door. "Atlanta sent over an incident flag this morning," she said, handing him a manila folder. "They've marked it priority review." Thomas accepted the folder with a raised eyebrow. "Before business hours? Must be significant." "It involves Delta," Margaret added. "Potential discrimination claim with medical complications." That captured Thomas's full attention. Delta Airlines represented Meridian's single largest commercial client, a relationship that dated back to 1989 and encompassed liability coverage worth over $500 million annually. Any incident involving potential discrimination required careful handling, add medical complications, and the risk profile increased exponentially. "Cancel my 9:30, he instructed Margaret, "and see if Charles Meadows is available for a call before noon." Inside his office, Thomas settled behind his desk and opened the folder. The incident summary was concise but concerning. A prominent physician had been forced to check critical medical equipment despite protests, resulting in damage that potentially compromised a surgical procedure. The physician, Dr. Elaine Beckett, had filed a formal complaint alleging that race played a factor in the airline staff's dismissal of her concerns. Thomas removed his reading glasses, massaging the bridge of his nose. In 40 years of insurance work, he had developed a finely tuned sense for identifying potential liability nightmares. This situation checked multiple boxes: medical consequences, discrimination allegations, and a highly credentialed complainant with significant professional standing. He picked up his phone and dialed a direct line to Meridian's legal department. "Sandra, it's Thomas Reynolds. I need a deep background check on a Dr. Elaine Beckett, Chief of Cardiology at Emory University Hospital." He listened briefly. "Yes, it's potentially sensitive. We need professional history, publication, record, previous litigation involvement, if any. And Sandra, I need it yesterday." After ending the call, Thomas turned to his computer and pulled up Delta's claim history for the past 5 years. The airline maintained an impressive safety record, but Thomas was looking for something specific. Any pattern of discrimination complaints or mishandling of passenger medical equipment. Both categories were flagged in Meridian's risk assessment protocols as potential indicators of systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. His search revealed 3 previous complaints involving alleged discrimination against medical professionals attempting to carry equipment on board. None involved Dr. Beckett, but 2 involved minority physicians. All 3 had been settled with confidentiality agreements and modest compensation. Thomas leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Individually, each incident could be explained away as a misunderstanding or overzealous application of baggage policies. Collectively, they suggested a pattern that raised concerns from an insurer's perspective, the kind of pattern that could eventually lead to class action litigation or regulatory scrutiny. His intercom buzzed. "I have Charles Meadows for you," Margaret announced. Thomas took a deep breath before accepting the call. As Meridian's chief risk officer, Charles would ultimately make any major decisions regarding the Delta account. "Charles, good morning. Thanks for making time," When my Boston SVP wants to discuss our largest account before his morning coffee, I make time, Charles replied, his deep voice carrying the slight drawl of his Alabama upbringing. What's the situation? Thomas outlined the incident, concisely, highlighting the key risk factors: the professional standing of the complainant, the potential medical consequences, the discrimination allegations, and the pattern of similar incidents over recent years. There was a long pause before Charles responded. Has Delta filed an official notice with us yet? No, and that's part of my concern, Thomas admitted. Our policy requires notification of any incident with potential liability exceeding $1 million within 48 hours. The complainant filed her report yesterday morning. Delta's internal investigation team has flagged it internally, but they haven't formally notified us. Perhaps they don't consider it a $1 million liability. Risk, Charles suggested, though his tone indicated skepticism. A prominent black female physician alleging racial discrimination that resulted in compromised medical equipment for an emergency pediatric procedure, Thomas countered. In today's environment, with the right attorney, that's potentially an 8-figure settlement, and if it reveals a pattern of similar incidents. I see your point, Charles conceded. What's your recommendation? Thomas hesitated only briefly. I think we need to initiate a policy compliance review of the Delta account. The weight of the suggestion hung between them. A policy compliance review was a formal process that allowed Meridian to investigate whether a client was adhering to all terms of their insurance coverage, including timely incident reporting and implementation of risk mitigation protocols. While not uncommon for smaller accounts, initiating such a review for a client of Delta's size and longevity was virtually unprecedented. That's a significant step, Thomas, Charles said after a moment. Delta has been with us for over 30 years. They generate 9 figures in annual premiums, which is precisely why we need to ensure they're meeting all policy requirements, Thomas countered. The larger the account, the greater our exposure if systematic issues are being overlooked. Another long pause. Thomas could almost see Charles weighing the commercial implications against the risk management imperatives, the delicate balance that defined insurance at this level. Proceed with a preliminary review, Charles finally decided, his voice quiet. I want to see what your team finds before we make any formal notifications to Delta. And Thomas, let's keep this between us for now. No need to alarm the executive committee until we have something substantive. Understood, Thomas agreed. I'll have preliminary findings by the end of the week. After ending the call, Thomas sat motionless at his desk, contemplating the potential ramifications of the path they were embarking upon. In the insurance business, relationships with major clients were cultivated over decades, built on mutual understanding and trust. Initiating a compliance review of Delta's account was like introducing a hairline crack into the foundation of that relationship, potentially insignificant, but also potentially the beginning of catastrophic failure. Yet his professional instincts, honed through 4 decades in the industry, told him this situation warranted the risk. Something about Dr. Beckett's experience, combined with the pattern of similar incidents and Delta's delay in notification, suggested systemic issues that could expose Meridian to unacceptable liability. Thomas reached for his phone again. Margaret, I need you to assemble the special review team in the conference room in 1 hour, and please pull all policy documentation for the Delta account, specifically the sections on incident reporting requirements and discrimination-related claims. As he gathered his materials for the meeting, Thomas reflected on the strange connectivity of modern business. A single interaction between a physician and airline staff in Atlanta had now set in motion processes that could potentially affect an insurance relationship worth $500 million. And at the center of it all was Dr. Elaine Beckett, a woman who, at this very moment, was likely focused entirely on saving the life of a 16-year-old patient, completely unaware of the corporate machinations her complaint had initiated, the operating room at Boston General Hospital hummed with the controlled intensity that accompanies complex cardiac procedures. For 3 hours and 27 minutes, Dr. Elaine Beckett had been repairing the damaged heart valve of 16-year-old Darius Williams. Her movements were precise, despite the need to use traditional techniques rather than her preferred specialized instruments. "Suction here, please," she directed Dr. Chen, who responded immediately. The young surgeon had proven himself exceptionally capable, anticipating her needs often before she voiced them. "Let's check the repair integrity before we proceed to closure." As they tested the repaired valve, Elaine allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. Despite the equipment challenges, the procedure was progressing well. Darius's heart was accepting the repair, his vital signs stable throughout the extended surgery. "Excellent work, Dr. Beckett," murmured the anesthesiologist, Dr. Rivera, from his position at the head of the operating table. "Pressure and rhythm holding steady." Elaine nodded slightly, her focus unwavering as she prepared for the final phase of the procedure. The traditional methods she'd been forced to employ required more sutures, more time, and more physical precision than her usual minimally invasive technique, but the result would be functionally equivalent. The main difference was the additional strain on her, mental and physical, and the slightly longer recovery time for Darius. As she worked, her mind briefly flashed to the moment at Atlanta's airport when she'd surrendered her medical bag. The dismissive expressions of the gate agent and flight attendant. The helpless frustration as she discovered the damaged equipment in Boston. The memory fueled a renewed precision in her movements, as if each perfect suture was a small act of defiance against those who had dismissed her concerns. "Final closure underway," she announced at last. "Dr. Chen, would you like to complete the procedure?" The young surgeon's eyes widened slightly above his surgical mask. An offer to close was both an honor and a vote of confidence from the renowned surgeon. "It would be my privilege," he responded, stepping into position as Elaine stepped back, remaining close enough to supervise but giving him room to work. As Chen completed the closure with impressive technique, Elaine found herself reflecting on her own early days in surgery, when opportunities to prove oneself were precious and rare. How many times had she been passed over for such moments in favor of less qualified male colleagues? How many times had she needed to be twice as good to receive half the recognition? The thought circled back to her experience with Delta, another instance where her professional identity had been dismissed despite clear credentials. "Excellent work, Dr. Chen," she said as he placed the final suture. "Clean and efficient. Darius will have minimal scarring." With the procedure complete, the operating room shifted into its post-surgery rhythm. Monitors being adjusted, instruments being counted and removed, preparations for transfer to recovery. Elaine stepped away to update the waiting family, removing her surgical mask as she left the operating theater. In the family consultation room, Martin and Teresa Williams rose immediately as she entered, the worry etched into their faces, the universal expression of parents whose child is undergoing major surgery, beginning to soften as they registered Elaine's calm demeanor. "Darius came through the procedure very well," she told them without preamble, knowing parents needed the crucial information before any technical details. "The valve repair was successful. His heart function is good, and he's being moved to recovery now." The visible wave of relief that washed over both parents was profound. Teresa's shoulders dropped as tension released, while Martin blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "Thank you, Dr. Beckett," Teresa said, reaching for Elaine's hand. "When Boston General said they were bringing in a specialist, we had no idea we'd be getting the Dr. Beckett. We've read about your work." Elaine smiled, squeezing the mother's hand gently. "Darius has a strong heart, figuratively and now literally. The procedure took a bit longer than usual due to some equipment issues, but the outcome is exactly what we wanted." Martin stepped forward. "Equipment issues? Was there a problem?" Elaine hesitated, weighing how much to share with already stressed parents. "Nothing that affected the success of the surgery," she assured them. "I had to use traditional techniques rather than my usual minimally invasive approach. The only difference for Darius will be a slightly longer recovery time. Days, rather than significant changes." Teresa's expression shifted subtly. her gaze becoming more evaluative. "If you don't mind me asking, what happened with the equipment?" Something in the woman's tone, a note of professional curiosity rather than merely parental concern, caught Elaine's attention. "It was damaged during air transport. May I ask what field you work in, Mrs. Williams?" "I'm an attorney," Teresa replied. "Medical malpractice defense primarily." The connection clicked into place for Elaine. The professional interest behind the question, the quick assessment of potential implications. "To be clear, there was no malpractice here," Elaine said. "The procedure was successful, the techniques completely sound. The only issue was that I had to use traditional methods rather than newer ones." Teresa nodded quickly. "Of course, I wasn't suggesting otherwise. I'm just professionally curious about what happened with your equipment, especially if it affected my son's procedure in any way." Elaine considered her response carefully. "My specialized instruments were in a medical bag, that airline. Personnel insisted I check, despite my explanations about its importance. When I retrieved it in Boston, the calibrations were off, making the instruments unsuitable for their intended purpose." Martin frowned. "Which airline?" "Delta," Elaine replied. "I've already filed a complaint about the incident." Teresa and Martin exchanged a glance that Elaine couldn't quite interpret. "I handle some of Delta's regional liability cases," Teresa said after a moment. "Mostly routine matters, nothing major, but I'm familiar with their procedures and policies regarding medical equipment." "What you're describing shouldn't have happened." The coincidence was startling, operating on the son of an attorney who worked with the very airline Elaine had just filed a complaint against. The medical world often felt small, but this connection seemed almost orchestrated. "I should clarify that I'm speaking as Darius's mother, not as Delta's occasional counsel," Teresa added quickly. "My son's well-being is my only concern right now, but if you're pursuing this matter with the airline, I'd be happy to point you toward the appropriate channels once Darius is recovered." Elaine nodded, appreciating the woman's professional courtesy while maintaining appropriate boundaries. "Thank you. For now, let's focus on Darius's recovery. He'll be in the ICU overnight for monitoring, then move to a regular room tomorrow. If all goes well, you'll be able to see him in about 30 minutes. After answering a few more questions about post-operative care and recovery expectations, Elaine excused herself to complete her surgical notes and check on another patient while at Boston General. As she walked through the hospital corridors, she found herself thinking about the strange connection she'd just discovered. Her patient's mother working as counsel for Delta. It felt significant somehow, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. In her borrowed office, Elaine sat down to document the procedure in detail, noting the modifications required due to the equipment issues and the extended operating time. As a researcher and educator as well as a surgeon, she valued meticulous documentation both for patient care and for the medical knowledge base. She was just completing her notes when her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Complaint, Delta Flight 1887, medical equipment damage." Elaine paused her documentation to open the email, expecting the standard corporate response, an apology without admission of fault, perhaps an offer of bonus miles or a travel voucher. What she found instead was notably different. "Dear Dr. Beckett, I am writing regarding your complaint about your experience on Delta Flight 1387 from Atlanta to Boston on March 15th. As Vice President of Operations Safety, I have personally reviewed your report and I am conducting a thorough investigation into the incident. The issues you've raised, particularly regarding the handling of critical medical equipment and the interactions with our staff, are taken extremely seriously by our organization. Rather than providing a preliminary response, I would like to request an opportunity to speak with you directly about your experience and our findings thus far. Would you be available for a video conference or phone call at your convenience in the coming days? Please let me know what would work best with your schedule. Sincerely, Cameron Wilson, Vice President, Operations Safety, Delta Airlines." Elaine read the email twice, surprised by both its tone and the seniority of the responder. In her experience, initial complaint responses typically came from customer service representatives working from scripts, not from vice presidents offering personal conversations. The deviation from standard protocol suggested her complaint had triggered something significant within Delta's corporate structure. She glanced at her calendar. She would be returning to Atlanta tomorrow afternoon, with a full surgery schedule resuming the day after. Finding time for this conversation would be challenging, but apparently necessary. She typed a brief response. Mr. Wilson, I appreciate your attention to this matter. I will be returning to Atlanta tomorrow evening. I could be available for a phone conversation on Thursday between 10:12 p.m. or Friday morning before 9 a.m. Regards, Dr. Elaine Beckett, Chief of Cardiology, Emory University Hospital. After sending the email, Elaine returned to her surgical notes, documenting the case with her customary precision. Yet as she worked, a part of her mind remained occupied with the unexpected response from Delta and what it might signify. What she couldn't know was that her complaint had already set in motion events far beyond a simple customer service. Response: events that would soon reach the highest levels of both Delta Airlines and Meridian Insurance, with potential consequences affecting thousands of employees and billions in corporate relationships. For now, though, her primary concern remained Darius Williams and his recovery. The corporate machinations her complaint had triggered would need to wait for her attention. First, she would ensure her patient was stable and on the path to recovery. Everything else was secondary. If you've been enjoying this journey so far, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one to light. Stories that explore the complex intersections of professional life, human dignity, and the quest for accountability in our modern world. Cameron Wilson sat in his Atlanta office, staring at Dr. Beckett's email response. The brief professional reply revealed little about her current disposition toward Delta, but the fact that she had agreed to speak with him directly was encouraging. In his 15 years of corporate experience, Cameron had learned that complainants who were willing to engage in conversation were generally also open to resolution. He turned to the stack of materials his team had assembled over the past 24 hours. Crew statements, baggage handling records, gate camera footage, Dr. Beckett's customer profile and travel history, and a preliminary liability assessment from legal. The picture emerging from these materials was not flattering to Delta. The gate agent, Tyler Mercer, had provided a statement that largely confirmed Dr. Beckett's account, though with notable differences in emphasis. Tyler maintained that he had simply been following company policy regarding carry-on limitations during a full flight with limited overhead space. His statement made no mention of Dr. Beckett identifying herself as a physician or explaining the critical nature of her equipment, omissions that the camera footage from the gate area directly contradicted. The lead flight attendant, Michael Pearson, had been more forthcoming in his statement, acknowledging that Dr. Beckett had identified herself as a physician traveling for emergency surgery. However, he stated that passengers often exaggerate the importance of their items to receive special treatment, and that consistent application of baggage policies is essential for operational efficiency. Most concerning to Cameron was the baggage handling log, which showed that Dr. Beckett's medical bag had been tagged as fragile and medical equipment at the gate, yet it received standard handling rather than the special procedures mandated for medical items. The disconnect suggested a breakdown in protocols that extended beyond individual staff decisions to systemic issues in Delta's baggage handling procedures. His intercom buzzed. "Legal is here for you too," his assistant announced. "Send them in," Cameron replied, gathering the documents into a more organized arrangement. Sarah Johnson, Delta's Assistant General Counsel for Customer Affairs, entered with the confident stride that had made her reputation within the company's legal department. At 44, Sarah had spent her entire career defending corporations against liability claims, developing a precise understanding of when to fight and when to settle. "Please tell me this isn't as bad as preliminary reports suggest," she said without preamble, taking a seat across from Cameron. He slid the file across his desk. "It's actually worse. Camera footage confirms Dr. Beckett clearly identified herself as a physician traveling for emergency surgery. Multiple witnesses heard her explain the critical nature of her medical equipment. Despite this, she was forced to check the bag, which was then mishandled despite clear labeling. The equipment was damaged, affecting a surgical procedure on a 16-year-old cardiac patient. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the information. And the discrimination angle? The footage also shows a white male passenger with camera equipment being allowed to store his bag in the first-class closet on the same flight, despite being seated in economy. He identified himself as a professional photographer, and his request was accommodated without argument. Sarah opened the file and began scanning the documents, her expression growing progressively more concerned. Have we received any indication that Dr. Beckett intends to pursue legal action? Not explicitly, Cameron replied. She's agreed to speak with me on Thursday. Her complaint requests an investigation, documentation of our policies, compensation for the equipment, and a meeting to discuss what she describes as a pattern of dismissive treatment toward minority professionals. Smart, Sarah murmured. She's establishing a paper trail and giving us an opportunity to acknowledge the issue officially before escalating. Classic groundwork for a potential discrimination claim. She looked up from the documents. What's your recommendation? Cameron had spent the morning preparing for this question, weighing various approaches against both corporate policy and his personal sense of what was right. I think we need to get ahead of this, he said. Full acknowledgement of the errors made, disciplinary action for the staff involved, comprehensive review and revision of our protocols for medical equipment, compensation for the damaged equipment, and a formal apology. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's quite an extensive response for what could be framed as a simple baggage mishandling incident. It stopped being simple the moment a teenage patient's surgery was compromised, Cameron countered. Add the clear differential. Treatment captured on camera, and we're looking at potential liability far beyond a standard baggage claim. Sarah nodded slowly. Have we notified Meridian yet? The question hit a nerve. As VP of Operations Safety, Cameron was responsible for ensuring timely notification to their insurers of any incident with potential significant liability. Meridian's policy required notification within 48 hours of any such incident, a deadline that had already passed. Not yet, he admitted. I wanted to complete the preliminary investigation first to determine if this met the threshold for notification. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Cameron, you know as well as I do that this clearly meets the threshold. A discrimination claim with medical consequences involving a minor patient, that's textbook notification territory. I understand, Cameron said, feeling defensive despite knowing she was right. I'll submit the notification today, along with our preliminary findings and proposed response plan. Make sure you document that the delay was due to investigative thoroughness, not an attempt to withhold information, Sarah advised. Meridian is particularly sensitive about timely notification. Remember the incident last year with the passenger injury in Denver? They raised concerns about our reporting timeline, even though we were only a day late. Cameron nodded, making a note to craft the notification carefully. The relationship with Meridian was critical to Delta's operations. Their insurance coverage protected the airline against everything from minor claims to potentially catastrophic liabilities. Maintaining that relationship required strict adherence to policy terms, including prompt incident reporting. What about the crew members involved? Sarah asked, returning to the file. Any previous issues? Tyler Mercer, the gate agent, has 2 prior customer complaints alleging rude or dismissive behavior, but nothing specifically related to discrimination. Michael Pearson, the lead flight attendant, has a clean record over 15 years of service. Sarah made some notes of her own. And the baggage handlers? That's where it gets complicated, Cameron explained. The system breakdown occurred at multiple points. Dr. Beckett's bag was properly tagged as medical equipment requiring special handling, but somewhere between the gate and baggage loading, those instructions were either ignored or not properly communicated, suggesting a systemic issue rather than individual failure. Sarah concluded, that's actually worse from a liability standpoint. Individual errors can be addressed through disciplinary action and training. Systemic failures suggest negligence at a corporate level. The assessment matched Cameron's own conclusions, What had initially appeared to be a customer service failure was revealing itself as something more concerning. A multi-point breakdown in protocols designed to protect exactly the kind of critical equipment Dr. Beckett had been carrying. "I'll prepare the Meridian notification immediately," Cameron said, reaching for his keyboard. "And I'll send you my proposed talking points for the conversation with Dr. Beckett before Thursday." Sarah stood gathering her materials. "Make sure you get the notification to Meridian today, Cameron, and word it carefully. We need to be thorough without suggesting broader liability than necessary." After Sarah left, Cameron began drafting the incident notification for Meridian Insurance. As he outlined the facts of the case, he found himself uncomfortable with the emerging narrative. The story revealed through documentation and footage was not one of simple miscommunication or honest error, but rather one of a physician being repeatedly dismissed despite clear credentials and explanations. The question that kept returning to him as he worked was simple but troubling. Would Dr. Beckett have received different treatment if she had been a white male physician rather than a black female one? The evidence suggested yes, and that realization made the incident not merely unfortunate, but potentially indicative of deeper issues within Delta's culture and protocols. As he completed the notification, Cameron knew that this case would likely become more than a routine insurance claim. Dr. Elaine Beckett wasn't just any passenger with a damaged bag. She was a highly respected physician whose medical equipment had been compromised, affecting a cardiac procedure on a teenage patient. The story had all the elements that could make it not just a liability concern, but a public relations nightmare if not handled properly. He clicked send on the notification email to Meridian, then opened his calendar to begin preparing for Thursday's conversation with Dr. Beckett. Whatever happened next would depend largely on that interaction, and Cameron was determined to approach it with the seriousness and respect it deserved. Thomas Reynolds stared at his computer screen, reading Cameron Wilson's incident notification for the third time. The email had arrived 4 minutes before the end of the business day, nearly 72 hours after Dr. Beckett had filed her initial complaint with Delta, well beyond the 48-hour notification window required by Meridian's policy. The delay itself was concerning, but even more troubling was the comprehensive picture emerging from Delta's investigation. Dr. Beckett's account had been largely corroborated, revealing a troubling pattern of dismissiveness and protocol, failures that culminated in significant medical consequences. Across town, oblivious to the corporate machinery now in full motion because of her complaint, Dr. Elaine Beckett was performing a routine cardiac catheterization on a 72-year-old patient at Emory University Hospital. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she guided the catheter through the patient's arterial system, her focus absolute as she navigated the delicate procedure. When her phone buzzed in her office an hour later, signaling a message from Delta's CEO requesting a personal conversation, she wouldn't see it until late afternoon, after 3 more procedures and a department meeting. The corporate crisis unfolding at Delta's headquarters, triggered by her damaged medical bag, remained entirely peripheral to her primary concern, the hearts beating beneath her skilled hands. Yet the two worlds, corporate accountability and medical precision, were now inexorably linked through her experience on Flight 1387. The standards she maintained in her operating room, the protocols she followed to ensure patient safety, the systems she had implemented in her department to prevent errors, all had parallels in the corporate structures now being scrutinized because of her damaged medical equipment. In both worlds, systems mattered, protocols mattered, accountability mattered, and in both worlds, failures could have consequences far beyond the immediate moment, rippling outward to affect lives, careers, and institutions in ways that could never have been predicted at the point of initial impact. As the first week of Meridian's compliance review neared its conclusion, the atmosphere at Delta's headquarters had transformed from initial apprehension to grim recognition of the systemic issues being uncovered. Sofia Rodriguez's team had methodically documented not just 4 incidents of delayed notification, but 17 over the past 3 years, a pattern that suggested not occasional oversight, but fundamental flaws in Delta's incident reporting procedures. Cameron Wilson sat alone in his office late Friday afternoon, reviewing the preliminary findings that Sophia had shared during their end-of-week briefing. The document made for sobering reading: detailed analysis of each reporting failure, identification of procedural gaps, and specific examples of how these gaps had potentially increased Meridian's exposure without their knowledge or consent. Most concerning was the section addressing the Beckett incident, which Meridian had classified as a high-severity notification failure with potential multi-million-dollar liability implications. Their analysis noted that, despite clear medical consequences, potential discrimination elements, and the involvement of a minor patient, Delta had delayed notification for 72 hours while conducting internal investigations, a direct violation of the 48-hour requirement for significant incidents. A knock at his door interrupted Cameron's review. Richard Lawson entered without waiting for a response, his expression grave. "I just got off the phone with Charles Meadows at Meridian," he said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought." Cameron gestured to the report on his desk. "I've been reviewing their preliminary findings. 17 notification failures over 3 years is significant." "It's beyond significant," Lawson corrected, taking a seat across from Cameron. "Meadows made it clear that they're considering this a material breach of our policy terms." The implications of that phrase sent a chill through Cameron. In insurance terminology, material breach was often precursor language to coverage modification or termination. "Did he indicate what remedial actions they're considering?" Cameron asked carefully. Lawson's expression tightened. 3 options, none favorable. First, they could increase our premiums by up to 40% to account for what they're calling undisclosed risk exposure. Second, they could maintain current premium levels, but reduce coverage limits by approximately 30%. Third, he paused, and Cameron noticed the tension in his CEO's normally composed demeanor. Third, they could terminate our relationship entirely, effective at the renewal date in 90 days. We would need to secure alternative coverage before then, or face operating without adequate liability protection. The gravity of the situation settled over the room. Aviation insurance at Delta's scale was specialized and limited. Only a handful of carriers worldwide had the capacity to provide the coverage levels they required. Securing new coverage within 90 days would be challenging under ideal circumstances. Doing so after being dropped by a carrier like Meridian for policy violations would be nearly impossible without accepting punitive terms. "What direction did Meadows seem to be leaning?" Cameron asked. "He was carefully non-committal," Lawson replied. "But reading between the lines, I think they're seriously considering the third option." Meadows emphasized Meridian's reputation for disciplined risk assessment and partnership based on mutual adherence to agreed terms. The subtext was clear. They view our reporting failures as a fundamental breach of trust. Cameron absorbed this information, the professional implications settling alongside the personal ones. As VP of Operations Safety, ultimate responsibility for incident reporting fell to him. If Delta lost its insurance relationship with Meridian because of systematic reporting failures, his position would likely become untenable. "What's our response strategy?" he asked, pushing aside personal concerns to focus on the immediate crisis. "We need to demonstrate immediate, substantive changes to our incident reporting procedures," Lawson said. "Not promises or plans, but implemented changes with verifiable results." Meadows indicated they would review any such changes before making their final determination. Cameron nodded, his mind already mapping potential process revisions. "I can have a comprehensive proposal ready by Monday morning. New notification protocols, automated escalation procedures, compliance, verification checkpoints, executive oversight requirements. Make it Sunday," Lawson directed. "I want to review it before we present to Meridian on Monday." "And Cameron." "Yes?" "This needs to be flawless. We're potentially talking about a $500 million relationship hanging in the balance. If we lose Meridian's coverage at current levels, the financial implications would be devastating. Increased premiums alone could impact our quarterly earnings by up to 8%. The subtext was clear. Cameron's job security depended on successfully navigating this crisis and preserving the Meridian relationship. It was fair, if uncomfortable. Leadership at this level meant accountability for systemic failures, regardless of good intentions or individual efforts. "I understand," Cameron replied simply. "You'll have the proposal Sunday morning." After Lawson departed, Cameron remained at his desk, the weight of responsibility settling firmly on his shoulders. The situation had escalated far beyond his initial assessment when Dr. Beckett's complaint first crossed his desk. What had begun as a customer service issue had revealed fundamental flaws in Delta's risk management protocols, flaws that now threatened one of the airline's most crucial business relationships. He pulled up his calendar, noting the scheduled call with Dr. Beckett on Monday morning, a follow-up to Lawson's initial conversation with her earlier in the week. The timing was either unfortunate or serendipitous, depending on perspective. He would be speaking with the woman whose complaint had triggered this organizational crisis just hours after presenting Delta's remedial plan to Meridian. As he began outlining the new incident reporting procedures that might save Delta's insurance relationship, Cameron reflected on the strange interconnectedness of it all. Dr. Beckett had simply wanted her medical equipment handled properly, so she could perform surgery on a teenage patient. Her reasonable expectation, professional respect and adherence to protocols, now paralleled Meridian's expectations of Delta. Both relationships hinged on trust, communication, and systematic adherence to agreed standards. The irony wasn't lost on Cameron. Delta had failed Dr. Beckett by dismissing her professional identity and ignoring established protocols for medical equipment. Now Meridian was considering severing ties with Delta for analogous reasons: dismissal of policy requirements and failure to follow established notification protocols. In both cases, the fundamental issue wasn't the specific incident, but the systemic failures it revealed. Failures that suggested deeper problems in organizational culture and accountability structures. As evening settled over Atlanta and Delta's headquarters gradually emptied, Cameron remained at his desk, methodically constructing the protocols that might save the airline's insurance relationship. The task was daunting but clear. Design. Systems that would ensure policy compliance regardless of individual decisions or circumstances. It was, he realized with grim irony, exactly the kind of systemic solution that might have prevented Dr. Beckett's experience in the first place. Monday. Morning arrived with the crisp clarity of high-stakes corporate drama. In Meridian Insurance's Boston headquarters, Thomas Reynolds reviewed Delta's proposed protocol changes one final time before the 10 a.m. presentation. The document was undeniably comprehensive. 37 pages of detailed process revisions, automated notification triggers, compliance verification mechanisms, and executive accountability measures. "They've been thorough," Thomas acknowledged to Charles Meadows, who had joined him to evaluate the proposal. "The question is whether it's too little, too late." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "The changes address our technical concerns about notification procedures. But the Beckett incident revealed something more concerning than procedural gaps. It suggested a cultural disconnect regarding risk assessment and professional respect that might not be solved by process revisions alone." "Agreed," Thomas said, "and that's what troubles me about continuing this relationship. If we maintain coverage after documenting 17 notification failures, what message does that send about accountability to our other clients?" The question hung between them as they prepared for Delta's presentation. The decision they would make today would affect not just their relationship with one client, but potentially set precedents for how Meridian handled policy violations across its portfolio. At precisely 10 a.m., they connected to the video conference. Richard Lawson and Cameron Wilson appeared on screen, both projecting professional composure despite the gravity of the situation. "Thank you for the opportunity to present our response to the compliance review findings," Lawson began. "We take the identified issues extremely seriously and have developed comprehensive protocol revisions to address each concern, Over the next 45 minutes, Cameron methodically outlined Delta's proposed changes. A complete overhaul of their incident reporting system with multiple redundancies to ensure timely notification regardless of investigation status. The most insignificant change, Cameron explained, displaying a process flow diagram, is the implementation of automated notification triggers based on incident classification. Any event matching predefined high-risk criteria will generate immediate notification to Meridian, with preliminary details automatically transmitted while investigation proceeds in parallel. The presentation was impressive in its thoroughness, addressing each finding from Meridian's review with specific corrective actions. As Cameron concluded, however, Thomas noticed what hadn't been addressed: the cultural factors that had allowed systematic policy violations to persist despite previous warnings. "Thank you for this detailed response," Thomas said as the presentation ended. "The proposed protocols are comprehensive, and if implemented as designed, would address the technical aspects of our concerns. However, I'm interested in your assessment of why these notification failures occurred, despite our previous communications about the importance of timely reporting." The question was directed at Lawson, deliberately targeting the CEO's understanding of the cultural dimensions beyond mere process failure. Lawson paused before responding, seemingly weighing his words carefully. "That's a fair question, Mr. Reynolds. After reflecting on the patterns identified in your review, I believe we developed an institutional blind spot regarding notification timing. Our focus on conducting thorough internal investigations before external reporting, while well-intentioned, created a culture where policy compliance became secondary to information completeness." He continued, his tone thoughtful rather than defensive. "This reflects a failure of leadership, my leadership, to emphasize that policy compliance isn't optional, regardless of our internal priorities. The protocols Mr. Wilson has outlined address the procedural gaps, but I recognize that sustainable change requires a cultural shift as well." The candid acknowledgement of leadership responsibility was unexpected but welcome. Thomas glanced at Charles, noting his subtle nod of approval. "And how do you propose to address that cultural dimension?" Charles asked, joining the conversation, directly for the first time. "3 specific actions," Lawson replied without hesitation. "First, I'm instituting quarterly compliance reviews reported directly to our board's risk committee, making policy adherence a governance matter, rather than merely an operational one. Second, we're revising our executive compensation structure to incorporate specific compliance metrics, directly linking leadership incentives to policy adherence. Third, I've initiated a comprehensive review of our response to the Beckett incident, not just as a notification failure, but as a case study in how our culture allowed multiple professionals to dismiss the concerns of a clearly qualified physician." The third point captured Thomas's full attention. The CEO was explicitly connecting the dots between Dr. Beckett's experience and the systemic issues revealed by Meridian's review, acknowledging that both reflected fundamental cultural challenges rather than isolated incidents. "That third point interests me particularly," Thomas noted. "Could you elaborate on your findings regarding the Beckett incident and how they relate to these broader cultural concerns?" Lawson nodded to Cameron, who took up the question. "Our review of the Beckett incident revealed multiple failure points where staff dismissed clear professional credentials and explicit warnings about medical equipment sensitivity," Cameron explained. This dismissal pattern continued through the baggage handling process, despite proper tagging and documentation. The subsequent notification delay to Meridian followed the same pattern, prioritizing internal processes over external obligations. He continued, his analysis surprisingly candid. "In both cases, Dr. Beckett's experience and our delayed reporting to Meridian, we see evidence of a culture that listens selectively, prioritizing internal convenience over external commitments. The parallel is unmistakable and concerning. The acknowledgement was more forthright than Thomas had expected, suggesting a level of institutional self-reflection that might actually address the underlying issues, rather than merely patching procedural gaps. After the presentation concluded, and the Delta executives disconnected, Thomas turned to Charles. "Thoughts?" he asked simply. Charles moved to the window, looking out over Boston Harbor as he considered the decision before them. They've done their homework, he acknowledged. The protocols are solid, and the leadership accountability measures suggest genuine commitment to change. But, Thomas prompted, sensing the reservation in his colleague's tone. But 17 notification failures in 3 years indicates a deeply ingrained pattern, Charles replied. And the Beckett incident, particularly its handling after the fact, raises questions about institutional reflexes that may not be easily reprogrammed. Thomas nodded in agreement. So the question becomes whether we believe their capacity for meaningful change outweighs the demonstrated pattern of non-compliance. Exactly, Charles confirmed, and whether maintaining this relationship aligns with our own risk tolerance and accountability standards. They sat in contemplative silence for a moment, weighing the decision that would affect not just Delta's operations, but potentially thousands of employees and millions of passengers, relying on the airline's comprehensive insurance coverage. What if we took a middle path? Thomas suggested finally. Maintain the relationship, but with modified terms that create concrete accountability measures during a probationary period. Charles raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What specifically? Are you thinking? A 6-month probationary period with 3 conditions, Thomas outlined. First, implementation of all proposed protocol changes with weekly compliance reporting to our review team. Second, a 20% premium increase during the probationary period, with potential reduction to previous levels after successful completion. Third, and most importantly, establishment of automatic termination triggers if any notification failures occur during probation. Charles considered the proposal, weighing its elements against Meridian's risk management principles and commercial interests. The automatic termination triggers are key, he noted. They would create unambiguous accountability without requiring additional review processes. Exactly, Thomas agreed. Delta would have a clear path to maintaining the relationship, but with concrete consequences for any further compliance failures. No discussions, no explanations, just automatic termination if notification protocols aren't followed. Charles returned to his seat, decision apparently made. Draft the terms. I'll present them to the executive committee this afternoon. Assuming approval, we can communicate the decision to Delta by close of business. As Thomas began outlining the probationary terms, he reflected on the strange journey from Dr. Beckett's damaged medical bag to this moment of corporate reckoning. The connection between her experience and Meridian's concerns had become increasingly clear throughout the review process, both situations reflecting how organizational cultures could systematically dismiss external obligations in favor of internal priorities. What remained to be seen was whether Delta could truly address the cultural dimensions underlying both failures. Process changes were relatively straightforward. Cultural transformation was considerably more challenging. The probationary terms Thomas was drafting would test not just Delta's procedural compliance, but their capacity for fundamental institutional change. In her office at Emory University Hospital, Dr. Elaine Beckett reviewed the final draft of her article for the New England Journal of Medicine. The piece detailed the modified valve repair technique she had developed during Darius Williams' procedure, an innovation born of necessity when her specialized instruments were damaged, but one that had subsequently proven beneficial in several additional cases. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. 10:30 a.m. follow-up call with Delta, Cameron Wilson. The timing was serendipitous. She had just received text confirmation from Boston that Darius had completed his 1-month post-operative checkup. With flying colors, his heart function now superior to pre-surgery levels, his recovery proceeding ahead of schedule. The positive outcome had transformed what began as an unfortunate equipment issue into an opportunity for medical innovation, AI, pattern familiar to experienced physicians, who often found that constraints could spark creativity. At precisely 10:30, her phone rang. "Dr. Beckett speaking," she answered. "Dr. Beckett, Cameron Wilson from Delta. Thank you again for making time to speak with me." "Of course," she replied, setting aside her manuscript to focus on the conversation. "I just received excellent news about Darius Williams's recovery, which puts this entire situation in an interesting perspective. "I'm very glad to hear that," Cameron responded, genuine relief evident in his voice. "I've been following up regularly with our legal department, who has contact with Ms. Williams. She mentioned her son was doing well, but it's wonderful to have your professional confirmation." There was something different in Cameron's tone compared to their previous conversation, a weight or gravity that hadn't been present before. Elaine's intuition, honed through decades of reading patients and colleagues, suggested something significant had transpired since they last spoke. "Mr. Wilson, you sound like you've had an eventful few weeks," she observed. "Is everything all right?" The question was met with a brief pause, followed by a surprised chuckle. "Your perceptiveness is remarkable, Dr. Beckett, and since you ask, no. Everything has not been all right, though the situation is stabilizing. Your complaint actually triggered a series of events that have had far-reaching implications for Delta." Elaine's interest was piqued. "In what way?" "I should probably start by saying that your experience highlighted systemic issues beyond just baggage handling protocols," Cameron explained. "It revealed gaps in our incident reporting procedures that extended to our relationship with our primary insurer, Meridian Insurance." "I'm not sure I understand the connection," Elaine admitted. "When incidents with potential significant liability occur, we're required to notify our insurers within specific timeframes, regardless of our internal investigation status," Cameron elaborated. "We failed to do that with your case, which prompted Meridian to initiate a comprehensive compliance review of our entire account." Elaine leaned back in her chair, surprised by this revelation. "And what did this review find?" "A pattern of delayed notifications spanning several years," Cameron admitted candidly. 17 instances where we exceeded reporting windows, potentially compromising our insurance coverage without realizing it. The scale of the issue began to register with Elaine. "And the consequences?" "Substantial," Cameron confirmed. "Meridian has placed our entire account, worth approximately $500 million in coverage, on probationary status with modified terms. We're implementing comprehensive protocol changes, reporting weekly on compliance, and operating under automatic termination, triggers if any further notification failures occur." Elaine absorbed this information with growing amazement. What had begun as her personal experience with dismissed concerns and damaged equipment had cascaded into a corporate accountability crisis affecting one of America's largest airlines. "I had no idea my complaint would trigger such an extensive review," she said finally. "Neither did we initially," Cameron acknowledged. "But your situation highlighted something important, a cultural tendency to prioritize internal processes over external commitments. The same institutional reflexes that led our staff to dismiss your concerns as a physician led us to delay proper notification to our insurers." The parallel was striking and insightful, connecting Elaine's personal experience to broader patterns of institutional behavior in a way she hadn't previously considered. "That's a remarkably candid assessment," she observed. "It's been a clarifying few weeks," Cameron replied, with what sounded like rueful self-awareness. "Nothing like a $500 million relationship hanging in the balance to focus organizational attention on systemic issues." Elaine smiled despite herself. There was something refreshing about this level of institutional honesty, a willingness to acknowledge fundamental problems rather than merely managing the immediate complaint. "So, where does this leave us regarding my original concerns?" she asked, returning to the primary purpose of their conversation. "We've implemented all the changes I outlined in our previous discussion," Cameron assured her. "Equipment compensation has been processed, staff disciplinary actions completed, and protocol revisions for medical professionals traveling with specialized equipment are being finalized. We'd still very much value your participation in reviewing those protocols, if you're willing." Elaine considered the request. Initially, she had viewed the invitation as primarily a gesture of goodwill from a corporation managing a customer complaint. Now, understanding the broader context of Delta's organizational reckoning, the opportunity seemed more substantive, a chance to contribute to meaningful systemic change. "I think I would be interested in participating," she decided, particularly given what you've shared about the broader implications. When systems fail in one area, they often reflect failures in others. That's as true in medicine as it appears to be in corporate operations. Exactly, Cameron agreed, a note of genuine respect in his voice. Your experience has become something of a case study for us in how seemingly isolated incidents can reveal systemic vulnerabilities. Our CEO has actually incorporated your story into his presentations to our leadership team, with appropriate anonymity, of course. I appreciate that, Elaine replied, though I'd be comfortable with my name being used if it helps emphasize the reality behind the case study. Sometimes concrete examples carry more weight than abstract principles. Thank you for that, Cameron said. And speaking of concrete examples, I'd like to update you on one more development. We've initiated a comprehensive review of similar incidents involving medical professionals over the past 5 years, specifically examining whether patterns of dismissal correlate with gender, race, or other factors. Elaine raised an eyebrow, impressed by the scope of this inquiry. That's a significant undertaking. What prompted that specific review? Your case highlighted questions that needed answering, Cameron explained. If our staff dismissed the concerns of a clearly credentialed chief of cardiology, we needed to understand whether that reflected isolated poor judgment or something more systematic. The preliminary findings suggest the latter, a pattern of differential treatment that we're now addressing through targeted training and accountability measures. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering specific protocol, revisions, and arrangements for Elaine's participation in the review process. As they concluded, Cameron's tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal. Dr. Beckett, if I may say something off the record. Of course, she replied, curious about this departure from their professional discussion. I want to thank you for how you approached this situation, he said. You could have immediately escalated to legal action or public criticism, which would have been entirely justified given what happened. Instead, you filed a detailed, factual complaint focused on systemic improvement rather than punitive measures. That approach created space for genuine accountability rather than mere defensive responses. Elaine hadn't expected this personal acknowledgement, but she appreciated its sincerity. Throughout her career, she had consistently favored systemic solutions over individual accommodations, understanding that sustainable change required addressing root causes rather than symptoms. I believe in fixing broken systems, Mr. Wilson, she replied simply. Always have. Individual blame rarely leads to lasting improvement in medicine or elsewhere. After ending the call, Elaine sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the unexpected journey from her rushed boarding of Flight 1387 to this moment of institutional reckoning. What had begun as personal frustration with dismissed concerns had catalyzed significant corporate accountability measures, affecting thousands of employees and billions in business relationships. There was something profoundly satisfying in knowing that her stand against dismissive treatment had triggered meaningful change, not merely token gestures or performative apologies, but substantive protocol revisions backed by financial and operational consequences. As she returned to her manuscript, documenting the surgical innovation born from equipment compromise, Elaine found herself thinking about the strange interconnectedness of systems. How a failure in airline baggage handling had led to a medical innovation that might benefit future patients, while simultaneously triggering corporate accountability mechanisms that might prevent similar failures for future travelers. In both, her medical practice and her interaction with Delta, the principle remained the same. Systems matter, accountability matters, and speaking up when those systems fail is not merely a personal right, but a professional responsibility. 6 months. Later, Thomas Reynolds sat in Charles Meadows' office reviewing the final report from Delta's probationary period. The comprehensive document detailed weekly compliance metrics, incident notification timelines, protocol implementation verification, and cultural assessment measures, all pointing towards substantive, sustainable change within the airline's operations. Not a single notification delay in 6 months, Thomas noted, genuine impression evident in his tone. and their protocol implementation appears to have gone well beyond the minimum requirements we established. Charles nodded thoughtfully. They seem to have taken this as an opportunity for fundamental reassessment rather than mere compliance. The cultural indicators are particularly encouraging. Staff surveys show significant improvement in understanding of risk management principles and accountability structures. So the question becomes whether we lift the probationary status and restore standard terms, Thomas said, getting to the heart of their meeting's purpose. Charles leaned back in his chair, considering the evidence before them. The data certainly supports that conclusion. They've met or exceeded every metric we established, implemented all promised protocol changes, and demonstrated sustained compliance over the full probationary period. There's also the matter of the premium increase, Thomas added. Maintaining the 20% elevation without clear justification could potentially create relationship tension going forward. Agreed, Charles said. Though I'd like to incorporate some elements of their enhanced reporting into the standard terms, particularly the weekly compliance summaries and quarterly audit processes. They've actually proven quite valuable from a risk assessment perspective. Thomas made notes as they discussed specific terms for the post-probationary period. After finalizing the details, he looked